The ballroom was breathtaking. A sea of over 200 guests, all dressed in their finest, sat at tables adorned with towering floral arrangements and glittering candlelight. The air was filled with the murmur of polite conversation and the scent of roses and champagne. It was my wedding day. From the head table, sitting beside my new husband, Julian, I looked out at the crowd and felt a sense of surreal, dreamlike happiness. My mother, Helen, caught my eye from her table nearby. She was wearing a simple but elegant sapphire blue dress that she had made herself. The color brought out the blue in her eyes, and she looked beautiful, her face glowing with a quiet, proud joy. She had worked so hard her whole life, first as a seamstress to raise me on her own, and then building her own company from nothing. Tonight, she was not the hard-working single mother or the brilliant CEO. She was just the mother of the bride, and she was happy. The clinking of a glass brought my attention back to the stage. It was time for the toasts. My maid of honor went first, telling a sweet, funny story from our childhood. Then Julian's best man gave a toast, full of jokes about Julian's terrible golf swing. And then Julian's younger sister Olivia stood up. She walked to the microphone, a smug, confident smile on her face. She was the perfect image of her family, beautiful, polished, and dripping with an arrogance they mistook for class. "I'd like to propose a toast," she began, her voice smooth as silk. "To my brother Julian and his new bride Ava. It's so wonderful to see our family, the prestigious Prescott family, welcoming in the up-and-coming family of the bride." A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The words up-and-coming were a clear, deliberate jab at my mother's humble beginnings. I felt a familiar knot of irritation tighten in my stomach, but I kept the smile plastered on my face. Julian squeezed my hand under the table, a silent plea for me to just let it go. But Olivia wasn't finished. She turned her head and looked directly at my mother. Her eyes scanned the beautiful blue dress, the one my mother had poured her heart into making. A cruel, condescending sneer twisted her lips. She leaned into the microphone, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "That's not a mother," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "That's a mistake in a dress." The silence that followed was deafening. It was a collective, shocked intake of breath from 200 people. I saw my mother's face. Her smile faltered, her eyes widened with a look of such profound public humiliation that it felt like a physical blow. And then, the silence was broken by laughter. Julian, my husband, the man who had vowed to love and protect me just hours before, threw his head back and laughed. It was a loud, booming laugh. His mother, Beatrice, joined in, a sharp, barking sound. Olivia smirked, pleased with her own cruelty. The rest of their family at the head table followed their lead, laughing at the joke, laughing at my mother. In that moment, something inside me broke. The love, the hope, the years I had spent trying to win their approval, all of it shattered into a million pieces and turned to ice. I looked at my mother's crushed face, her eyes filling with tears. Then I looked at Julian, my husband, laughing at her pain. The man I thought I loved was a stranger, a cruel, weak stranger. I stood up. My movements were calm and deliberate. The laughter at the head table died down as they saw me rise, my wedding dress pooling around my feet. I gently took the microphone from the stand in front of Julian. "You're right," I said, my voice quiet but carrying through the silent room. "This is a mistake." I turned my head and looked not at my new husband, but at the 200 stunned guests. "The wedding is off," I announced, my voice clear and strong, without a single tremor. "Thank you all for coming. Please enjoy the dinner." I placed the microphone carefully back on the stand. I looked at Julian's face, his mouth hanging open in stunned disbelief. I looked at Olivia and Beatrice, their smug expressions replaced by pure shock. Then I turned my back on them. I walked over to my mother's table, took her hand, and gently pulled her to her feet. "Come on, Mom," I whispered. "Let's go home." Hand in hand, we walked out of the grand ballroom. I didn't look back. I left my wedding, my husband, and the entire Prescott family sitting in the ruins of the perfect evening they had just destroyed. And I knew with absolute certainty that their world was about to fall apart. Walking out of my own wedding reception felt like stepping out of a fever dream and into the cold, clear night air. The humiliation, the laughter, the look on my mother's face, it all swirled in my head. But to understand how we got to that moment, you have to understand the two families, two worlds that were never meant to collide. I met Julian during a fundraiser for the city library. He was charming, handsome, and had a smile that could disarm an army. He pursued me with a single-minded determination that was both flattering and intoxicating. He was a Prescott, a name that was practically royalty in our city. Prescott Enterprises was an old, established company, and Julian was its handsome, charismatic heir. I, on the other hand, was just Ava. I told him I was an event planner, a simple, respectable job. It wasn't a lie, exactly. I did plan events for my mother's company. I just omitted the fact that I was also the chief operating officer. From the very beginning, the tension between our families was a low, constant hum beneath the surface of our whirlwind romance. The Prescotts were the definition of old money. Their wealth was generational, inherited, and it came with a rigid set of rules and expectations. They lived in a world of country clubs, legacy admissions, and judging people based on their last names. My mother, Helen, was the opposite. She was the proud daughter of immigrants, a woman who had been widowed young and had raised me by working as a seamstress out of our small apartment. Her hands, skilled with a needle and thread, were her greatest asset. She was humble, kind, and completely unimpressed by brand names or fancy titles. When Julian first brought me to meet his family at their sprawling estate, it was like being presented at court. His mother, Beatrice, looked me up and down as if she were inspecting livestock. She asked me about my family, my background, my schooling. When I told her my mother was a seamstress, her lips tightened into a thin, disapproving line. "How quaint," she had said, the word hanging in the air like a bad smell. From then on, I was a project. Beatrice and Olivia, Julian's sister, were constantly trying to mold me into a proper Prescott wife. They would make subtle, cutting remarks about my clothes, my manners, my friends. Once at a dinner party, Beatrice watched my mother hold her fork. "Oh, Helen, dear," she said loudly, stopping all conversation. "That's the American style. In Europe, we keep the fork in our left hand, like this," she demonstrated, holding her own fork with an exaggerated elegance. My mother, flustered, had simply put her fork down and didn't eat for the rest of the meal. Olivia was more direct. "I just don't understand why your mother doesn't buy a new car," she said to me once, after seeing my mother's modest sedan. "It's so practical. Doesn't she want something a little more impressive?" Every time Julian would make excuses. "That's just how they are, darling," he'd say, wrapping his arms around me. "They're from a different generation. They don't mean anything by it. You just have to get used to it." He was always asking me to be the one to bend, to compromise, to understand. He never once asked them to be kinder. He never once defended me or my mother. I was so in love, so desperate to make it work, that I convinced myself he was right. I told myself that this was the price of admission into his world. To make things easier, I downplayed my own life. I let them believe I was just a simple event planner. I never talked about my role at my mother's company, Innovate Solutions. I never mentioned that I managed a budget of hundreds of millions of dollars, or that I had negotiated deals all over the world. I made myself smaller, less intimidating, hoping it would make them more comfortable. I thought if they saw me as non-threatening, they might eventually accept me. I was a fool. I see that now. I was trying to build a bridge to an island that had no intention of ever letting me on its shores. I was so focused on getting their approval that I didn't see the truth. They didn't want a bridge. They wanted a surrender. And the laughter at my wedding, the cruel, echoing sound of my own husband mocking my mother's pain, was the sound of my final, unconditional surrender. Or so they thought. The Prescotts lived in a beautiful, gilded cage of their own making. Their name was their most valuable asset. a currency they had been trading on for generations. Prescott Enterprises was a landmark in our city, a symbol of old-world stability and prestige. But what no one outside their inner circle knew, what I only knew because of the impending merger, was that the cage was rusting from the inside out. The beautiful family legacy was on the verge of complete collapse. Prescott Enterprises was a dinosaur. They had failed to innovate, failed to adapt. They were being crushed by smaller, faster, more modern companies. For the last 5 years, they had been quietly bleeding money, propping up their lavish lifestyles by taking out bigger and bigger loans against their dwindling assets. They were, to put it simply, broke. Their reputation was the only thing keeping them afloat. My mother's company, Innovate Solutions, was the opposite. My mother, the humble seamstress, had a genius for systems and logistics. After I went to college, she started a small consulting business from her kitchen table, helping local businesses streamline their inventory. Her methods were so effective that word spread. Her small business grew, then it exploded. Today, Innovate Solutions is a multi-million-dollar tech company that creates cutting-edge logistics software for some of the biggest corporations in the world. It is a quiet giant, a powerhouse that doesn't need a flashy name or a public profile. About a year ago, Julian came to me. He was in a panic. He confessed that his family's company was in serious trouble. He told me they were on the verge of bankruptcy. He was terrified of the humiliation, the scandal, the loss of their social standing. He was asking for a loan, a bailout. I went to my mother. I knew she had the resources to help, but I also knew she was a shrewd businesswoman. She listened patiently as I explained the situation. She had never been impressed by the Prescott name, but she was fond of me, and by extension, she wanted Julian to be stable and secure. "A loan is a temporary fix, Ava," she had said, looking at the numbers I had brought her. "Their business model is broken. Pouring money into it is like pouring water into a bucket full of holes." Then she proposed a different solution, an acquisition. "We will buy them," she said simply. "Our company is looking to expand into new sectors. We can absorb their assets, streamline their operations, and save the jobs of their employees. It's a sound business decision." But she knew what this would do to the Prescott pride. So, she offered them a deal that was almost unheard of in its generosity. The acquisition would be framed as a merger of equals. The Prescott name would remain. Julian would be given a fancy, public-facing title on the new board. It was a deal designed to let them save face, to pretend they were still powerful partners, not a drowning company being thrown a lifeline. The wedding was the final piece of the puzzle. It was Julian's idea. "It's perfect, darling," he had said, his eyes shining with relief. "The wedding will be a public symbol of the union between our two great families, our two great companies. It will make the merger look like a natural, powerful alliance." I see now that he never saw it as a marriage. He saw it as a business transaction. I was the price he had to pay to save his family's name. For months, our lawyers had been working on the deal. The contracts were incredibly complex. Mr. Thorne, my mother's fiercely loyal lawyer, had structured the deal to protect Innovate Solutions at every turn. The final signing was scheduled for the Monday after the wedding. The whole deal, the entire financial salvation of the Prescott family, was contingent on the marriage taking place. They had no idea. They sat in their grand estate, looking down on my mother, the simple seamstress, while she was the one orchestrating their rescue. They thought they were doing us a favor by allowing me to marry into their prestigious family, that they were giving us a leg up in the world. They never once suspected that we were the ones holding the strings. They were so blinded by their own pride, so wrapped up in the myth of their own superiority, that they couldn't see the truth, even as it was poised to save them. They thought they were kings. They never realized they were beggars. The week before the wedding was a blur of last-minute details and rising tension. But all the stress, all the family drama, seemed to crystallize around one single object: my mother's dress. To anyone else, it was just a dress. But to my mother, it was a statement. For most of her life, her hands and her sewing machine were her livelihood. They were how she kept a roof over our heads, food on our table. Her skill with a needle and thread was a part of her identity, a source of quiet, humble pride. So when it came time for her mother of the bride dress, there was no question. She would make it herself. She spent weeks on it. I would go to her house and find her surrounded by swaths of sapphire blue silk, her brow furrowed in concentration. She didn't use a store-bought pattern, she designed it herself. It was a simple, elegant sheath dress with a matching jacket. It was classic, timeless, and beautifully made. The stitching was perfect, the drape of the fabric flawless. When she tried it on for me, she looked radiant. The vibrant blue made her eyes sparkle. She looked like herself. The problem arose during the final family get-together before the wedding, a tense, formal brunch at the Prescott estate. My mother, so proud of her creation, wore the dress to show Beatrice and Olivia. Beatrice circled my mother slowly, her eyes narrowed in critical appraisal. She looked at the dress not as a beautiful garment, but as a problem to be solved. "It's very vibrant, Helen," she said finally, the word vibrant sounding like an accusation. "Are you sure it's appropriate for a mother of the bride? One doesn't want to pull focus." My mother's smile faltered. "Oh, I thought the color was cheerful." Olivia, never one to miss an opportunity to twist the knife, chimed in. "Most mothers wear beige, you know," she said, examining her fingernails with a bored expression. "Or a pale gray. The goal is to blend in, not stand out." "It's a wedding, not a funeral," I snapped, my patience wearing thin. Julian immediately shot me a warning look. He stepped forward and put his arm around his mother. Now, they're just trying to help, darling. They know about these things." "It's a beautiful dress, Mom," I said, pointedly ignoring them and looking directly at my mother. But the damage was done. I could see the light in my mother's eyes dim. She felt self-conscious, her pride in her work tarnished by their snobbery. They had taken something that was a pure expression of her love and talent and turned it into a social misstep. Later that evening, Julian and I had a fight about it. "Why do you always let them do that?" I demanded as we drove home. "Why do you never, ever stand up for her?" "Stand up for what?" he asked, genuinely confused. "They were just giving their opinion. My mother knows about fashion, about what's appropriate. They were trying to save your mother from embarrassing herself." "Embarrassing herself?" I was incredulous. "She is a brilliant, talented woman who made a beautiful dress with her own 2 hands. That's something to be proud of, not ashamed of. You're being too sensitive." "Ava," he said with a sigh, his voice laced with that familiar, patronizing tone. "It's just a dress. It's not a big deal. Can't you just let it go for the sake of keeping the peace?" "It's just a dress." But it wasn't just a dress. It was a symbol of everything they despised about us. It was my mother's humble past, her working-class hands, her refusal to conform to their beige, bloodless world, and Julian's dismissal of it, his complete inability to see why it mattered, was the biggest red flag of all. I let it go, for the sake of peace. I swallowed my anger and told my mother she looked beautiful and that she should wear whatever made her happy. She decided to wear the blue dress. It was an act of quiet defiance, a final, brave assertion of her own identity before she was to be swallowed up by the Prescott name. I should have seen it then. I should have known that their attack on her dress was a preview of the main event. They weren't just criticizing a piece of fabric. They were sharpening their knives for the woman who was wearing it. The drive home from the wedding that wasn't a wedding was silent. My mother sat beside me in the passenger seat, still in her beautiful, maligned blue dress. She didn't cry. She just stared out the window at the passing city lights, her hand resting on mine. The silence wasn't awkward. It was a shared space of shock and understanding. There was nothing to say. We had been pushed to the edge, and I had chosen not to fall, but to walk away. We went back to my mother's house, the small, comfortable home I grew up in. It felt like a sanctuary after the cold grandeur of the Prescott's world. I made us tea, my hands moving on autopilot. The bottom of my wedding dress was dirty from walking through the parking lot. I didn't care. My phone, which I had left in my mother's purse, started buzzing. Then it started ringing. It didn't stop. The screen lit up with Julian's name, over and over. Then came the texts. then the voicemails. I listened to the first one out of a morbid curiosity. "Ava? What are you doing? Pick up the phone. You can't just walk out like that. You've made a scene. You've embarrassed my family. You need to come back here right now and apologize." Apologize. The sheer audacity of it almost made me laugh. I deleted the message. The next one came 10 minutes later. His voice was different. The anger was gone, replaced by a strained, pleading tone. "Okay, darling, I'm sorry. Olivia was out of line. We're all sorry." "But you can't do this. You're overreacting. It was a stupid joke. Please, just come back. We can fix this. Think of the guests. Think of our families." He didn't say, "Think of my mother's feelings." He didn't say, "I'm sorry I hurt you." He said, "Think of the guests." He was worried about the social fallout, not the emotional wreckage. The third voicemail an hour later was pure rage. "How dare you?" he yelled, his voice hoarse. "Who do you think you are? You have humiliated me. You have humiliated my mother on her son's wedding day. You are a selfish, dramatic child. You need to fix this mess, Ava. You need to fix it now." I turned the phone off and dropped it on the counter. It was just noise. He still thought he was in charge. He still thought he held all the cards, that this was a tantrum I would get over. He had no idea that the world he was standing on was about to turn to dust. My mother and I sat in her quiet living room, sipping our tea. "Are you okay, Mom?" I asked softly. She looked at me, a sad, wise smile on her face. "I'm hurt that they could be so cruel," she said honestly. "But I am so proud of you, Ava. You have a spine of steel, just like your father." She reached out and tucked a stray piece of hair behind my ear. "He would have been proud too." A single tear escaped and rolled down my cheek. It wasn't for Julian. It was for the years I had wasted, the times I had let them make my mother feel small. We didn't talk about the merger. We didn't talk about the business. We just sat together, mother and daughter, healing the wound that had been inflicted. The next morning, I turned my phone back on. There was a string of missed calls from Julian, Beatrice, and Olivia, and one from a number I didn't recognize. It was a text message. "Mr. Prescott? This is John from United Metro Bank. We need to speak with you urgently regarding the outstanding line of credit for Prescott Enterprises. Please call me back as soon as possible." I smiled. The first domino had fallen. The bank that held the massive loan keeping their company afloat had been promised that the merger with my mother's company would be signed on Monday. The wedding was the public guarantee of that deal. With the wedding publicly and spectacularly canceled, the bank was getting nervous. They were calling in their markers. Julian, in his panic over the social humiliation, wouldn't even be thinking about the business implications yet. He was still trying to manage the gossip, the canceled wedding gifts, the sheer embarrassment of it all. He was fighting a battle on the wrong front. He had no idea that the real war was already lost. Monday morning arrived, crisp and clear. It was supposed to be the first day of my honeymoon in the Maldives. I was supposed to be on a plane, sipping champagne with my new husband. Instead, I was in a boardroom on the 40th floor of the Innovate Solutions headquarters, sipping black coffee and preparing to dismantle an empire. I wasn't wearing a sundress. I was wearing a charcoal gray power suit that fit me like a second skin. My hair was pulled back in a severe, professional knot. The heartbroken bride was gone. The COO was here. My mother sat at the head of the long, polished table. She was wearing a simple but elegant navy blue suit, a different shade from the dress, but just as commanding. Mr. Thorne, our lawyer, sat to her right, a folder of documents neatly arranged in front of him. My phone had been buzzing all morning with frantic, angry texts from Julian. He was demanding to know why the bank was calling him, why their credit line was being reviewed. He still didn't understand. He thought it was a temporary problem, a misunderstanding he could smooth over with his famous Prescott charm. He had no idea that the storm was just beginning. I looked at my mother. "Are you sure about this?" I asked her one last time. She met my gaze, her eyes clear and firm. There was no trace of the hurt, humiliated woman from the wedding. This was the CEO who had built a company from scratch. "They made their choice, Ava," she said, her voice quiet but absolute. "Now we make ours." That was all I needed to hear. I picked up the phone in the center of the table and dialed the number for our company's lead counsel. "Good morning, Robert," I said when he answered. "It's Ava. I have an instruction for you regarding the Prescott Enterprises acquisition." "Ava, I heard about the wedding. I'm so sorry. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Robert," I said, my voice leaving no room for sympathy. "Please withdraw the acquisition offer for Prescott Enterprises. All negotiations are to be terminated, effective immediately. Send them the formal notice within the hour." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Are you sure?" "I am," I said. "Thank you, Robert." I hung up the phone. The first lever was pulled. The lifeline we had thrown to the sinking Prescott ship had just been cut. Next, I dialed the personal number for Mr. N. Henderson, the CEO of United Metro Bank. He was the man who held the loans that were keeping the Prescotts afloat. He was also a man whose company used our logistics software. Innovate Solutions was one of his biggest and most important clients. "Ava," he said, his voice warm and friendly. "Congratulations on the wedding. I trust it was a beautiful affair." "There was a change of plans, John," I said calmly. "The wedding didn't happen, and as a result, our merger with Prescott Enterprises is no longer moving forward." I let that sink in. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. The merger was the only reason he had extended the Prescott's massive line of credit. It was the guarantee that his loan would be paid back. "I see," he said, his voice suddenly all business. "I'm calling you as a courtesy," I continued. "Innovate Solutions now considers Prescott Enterprises to be a high-risk, unstable asset. We will be re-evaluating our own corporate banking strategy accordingly, of course. We prefer to partner with institutions that show sound fiscal judgment." The message was not subtle. It was a threat wrapped in the polite language of corporate speak. "If you continue to back a failing company, you risk losing our multi-million-dollar account." "I understand completely, Ava," he said, his voice now cold as ice. "Thank you for the information. I appreciate the heads up." I hung up the phone. The second lever was pulled. I knew exactly what would happen next. Henderson would call an emergency meeting. He would protect his bank. He would call in the Prescott's loans. All of them. Immediately. They would be given a deadline of days, maybe hours, to produce millions of dollars they simply did not have. The Prescott family, so proud of their name, their legacy, their social standing, was about to be hit by a financial tidal wave. They had been so focused on a petty act of social cruelty, so sure of their own superiority, that they never saw the real power sitting right in front of them. They had sneered at the seamstress, and in doing so they had just sealed their own ruin. Their world was falling apart, and they had handed me the scissors to cut the final thread. It happened faster than I even expected. By Tuesday afternoon, the financial news outlets were buzzing. Prescott Enterprises faces sudden liquidity crisis. Banking giant pulls credit line from historic firm. The carefully constructed facade of the Prescott legacy was cracking under the pressure, and the whole world could see. They showed up at our headquarters on Wednesday morning, not just Julian, but his mother, Beatrice, as well. They didn't have an appointment. They tried to force their way past security, demanding to see me. They looked like they hadn't slept in days. Julian's face was pale and drawn, his usual confident charm replaced by a wild, desperate panic. Beatrice's perfect, proud composure had crumbled, leaving behind a pinched, furious expression. I had security escort them up to the main boardroom. When they walked in, they were clearly expecting to find me alone, a hysterical woman they could intimidate and blame. Instead, they found me at the head of a 30-foot mahogany table. My mother was sitting calmly to my right, a cup of tea in her hands. Mr. Thorne was to my left, his expression impassive. They stopped dead, completely thrown. They stared at me, then at my mother, then at the opulent boardroom with its panoramic view of the city. The scene did not compute. "Ava!" Julian finally sputtered, finding his voice. "What is the meaning of this? What have you done? You have to call the bank. You have to tell them the merger is back on." Beatrice pointed a trembling finger at me. "You did this," she hissed. This is your fault. You have ruined us, all because of a little joke." I didn't stand up. I didn't raise my voice. I simply looked at them, my expression calm. "Please, sit down," I said. It was not a request. They hesitated, then sank into the 2 chairs at the far end of the table, looking small and out of place. "There is no merger to put back on, Julian," I said, my voice even. "The offer was withdrawn on Monday." "But why?" he asked, his voice cracking. "It was a business deal. You can't just throw it away over a personal disagreement." "You're right," I said. "It was a business deal. A deal in which my company, Innovate Solutions, was poised to acquire your bankrupt one." Beatrice gasped. "Bankrupt? We are not bankrupt. We are Prescott's." "Your company has been insolvent for 3 years," Mr. Thorne interjected, speaking for the first time, his voice dry as dust. "You've been surviving on loans that you have no ability to repay. We have the financials, all of them." Julian stared at my mother, a dawning horror in his eyes. "Innovate Solutions. Your mother's company?" "My mother is the founder and CEO of this company," I said. "I am the COO, the woman you laughed at. The mistake in address was the anonymous benefactor who was about to save your family from complete and utter ruin. The wedding wasn't just a symbol of our families joining, it was the final condition for the execution of a contract that would have saved your name, your company, and your home." The silence in the room was absolute. Beatrice looked at my mother, truly looked at her for the first time. She wasn't seeing a humble seamstress. She was seeing the powerful, intelligent woman who had held their entire world in the palm of her hand, the woman whose kindness and generosity they had mistaken for weakness. The color drained from her face as the full scope of her arrogance, her monumental miscalculation, crashed down upon her. "You thought you were royalty, bestowing a great favor upon us," I continued, my voice quiet but relentless. "You thought you were allowing us into your world, but the truth is, you were beggars, and you spat in the face of the person who was offering you a lifeline." Julian buried his face in his hands. Beatrice just sat there, speechless, her pride shattered into a million pieces. "The deal is dead," I said, standing up. "Prescott Enterprises will now have to face its creditors alone. I believe you have a meeting with them this afternoon. I suggest you don't be late." I pressed the intercom on the table. "Security, please show Mr. and Mrs. Prescott out." They were led away, 2 broken people, their legacy in ashes around them. After they were gone, my mother came and stood beside me at the large window. We looked out at the city, at the endless possibilities stretching out to the horizon. She put her arm around my shoulders. "You did the right thing, Ava," she said softly. I leaned my head against hers. The wedding was a disaster. My heart had been broken. But in the wreckage, I had found something I didn't even know I had lost. I had found my own strength. We stood there for a long time, mother and daughter, 2 CEOs, ready for whatever came next.